evening, everyone. Thanks, Darshan. Good evening, everyone. I'm Pranita, and I welcome you all on behalf of SINE for this Power Up Biotech series. SINE, as you all are aware, is established for the benefit of startups, and it supports innovators, startups, and it's a technology business incubator. It supports innovator startup and provides start to scale support in the form of funds, mentoring, connection with the ecosystem, and many more. Under this Power R series, previously we have conducted 2 sessions on ISO standard with Dr. Sanjay Joshi, and the first session was an overview of ISO 13485. Standards for medical devices. The other session, which we conducted last week, or maybe previous to that, 2 weeks ago. It was about ISO 14971, which is for risk management for medical devices. So today, under this ISO series, we are going to cover IEC 62366, which is usability engineering for medical devices. And again, we have invited Dr. Sanjay Joshi to address this topic of IEC 62366. I have already introduced Sanjay in previous sessions, but for the benefit of those who have joined this session probably for the first time, Sanjay is IIT Bombay alumni, and he's currently working as a senior director at Globus Medical, where he has served multiple leadership roles in design, development, and launch of innovative products. And earlier, he also worked with GE Healthcare for more than a decade. So he has around 2 decades of product development experience in the medical device industry. Sanjay has earned a PhD in electrical engineering from University of Maryland, Baltimore County, and MBA from Marquette University, Wisconsin. And he's currently based near Boston, USA. And he's addressing this session early morning. And thank you for this, Sanjay. With this introduction, I welcome you to address this topic. And I also request all the audience to put their questions in the chat box, and we can take them towards the end of the session. We can also unmute attendees here if they want to ask the question to Sanjay. So please raise your hand as well during the Q&A session. So Sanjay, over to you for the session.
Thank you. Let me share my screen. Hopefully you guys can see my screen in full screen mode.
Yes, it's
okay. All right, welcome everyone. Good evening to most of you. So today we are going to talk about the usability engineering standard IEC 62366, and a quick agenda. We are going to do a recap from the last 2 sessions, very brief, on the key points from quality management system or ISO 13485. Also the risk management for medical devices, which is ISO 14971. And then we'll get into the standard used for usability, which is IEC 62366. This is used during design and development of your product, and we are going to look at some examples. Now, I do talk about standards. I quickly wanted to bring up the websites for these organizations. So there are 2 main organizations that publish standards for medical devices, ISO and IEC. And you can, if you can see my screen. So IEC.ch is the homepage of International Electrotechnical Commission, and the standard we are talking today is published by them, and they are based in Switzerland, and this is their website, and you can purchase these standards directly from IEC. And let me see where they're. So if you go to my IEC, you can log in, and there is a web store where you can look and search for standards. ISO, or International Organization for Standardization, is another non-profit organization. So I don't remember exactly where they are based, but they do have an online store. Now, keep in mind, these standards tend to be expensive. So if you try to buy them in India, last time I checked, the prices were in Swiss francs, and I converted them to rupees. It was about anywhere from 10,000 to 25,000 rupees. So either you can buy them yourself, or if you are working with an incubator, we might make a copy available to you. So, again, this is always good to network in this field. So with that, let's get into the recap from the last two sessions. The quality management system, we talked about the standards. And again, the backdrop on that, they are created to help you. And they are created by experts. They are on the board of these international organizations. They come from government, they come from industry. They're usually veterans, multiple decades experience in this space. We talked about the two main bodies. There are other bodies too, like IEEE and UL, that publish other kind of standards. And one thing you might think that these standards seem a little vague. They won't exactly tell you what to do. And that is actually on purpose. And that purpose is to give you, as the medical device manufacturer, the flexibility to do what makes sense for your product. And I always use them as an opportunity to take a breather, rise a mile high, and then say, what is the big picture? Why are we doing all this? The summary from ISO 13485 is three things. You need to say what you do, and the standard tells you on what are the recommended activities during the product development. The second part is do what you say. And the third part, which is critical in case of an audit, is to document evidence that you did what you said. And this is usually the first thing, say what you do, comes in the form of standard operating procedures or SOPs. Do what you say is basically your design and development activities, and the documentation of evidence is usually your design history file, device master records, all the documentation that goes with medical devices. When you do all this, please use common sense. And again, you're not doing what you are doing to show compliance. What you are doing is to develop a product, and don't let the process overwhelm you. And really, there is no secret ingredient. This is it. All the 3 points I talk about ISO 13485, just follow them, you will be in good shape. Then in the last talk, we talked about risk analysis for ISO 14971. I won't go into too much detail, but here is a sample row at the output of all that. We talk about what can cause harm, so hazards such as high voltage. We need to document what are the sequence of events that can cause this hazard to cause the harm, like, for example, a short circuit and then user touching the scanner, and that can cause serious burns. We talked about rankings of severity. We used a scale of 1 through 6, 1 through 5 rather, which is shown here, and the probability of occurrence, another scale 1 through 5 shown here. The multiplication of these two give you the risk before you do anything. So this is called pre-mitigation risk or pre-control risk. Then you implement a control, like you are going to ground the metal case on your scanner. We gave it an ID so that it's easy to show evidence of verification. And that control reduced the probability of occurrence from 3 to 1. The multiplication yielded a 4, which is green. And that's because of this matrix. And in the last talk, we figured out how to actually derive this matrix and figure out what is unacceptable, which is the red zone here. What is definitely acceptable, a green zone here. What is sort of acceptable is the yellow zone here. And the aim is anything that is red, you need to get in the green or the yellow zone. And the end result of all the risk management activities is what you deliver in your design history file. The risk management plan needs to document what is it that you are going to do, including the ranking of severity and probability and what is acceptable, what is not acceptable. Your risk analysis captures all sorts of bad things that can happen, hazard, sequence of event, risk assessment. There is also talked about a response to 37 questionnaire. And the risk controls, and we recommend that you use requirements as risk controls. And finally, the risk management report, an overall summary of your risk management activities. All this you put in your design history file and use it at the time of submission to your regulatory agency. Now we'll get into today's topic called usability engineering. And I love this picture. If you are too young to remember this, this was actually the precursor to all the cell phones. This was a transcorder used in Star Trek, the original TV series. I grew up watching this series. And a quick reminder, oftentimes people think about usability as user interface. And user interface is something that is applicable only to software. That is not the case. Usability and user interface, the standard is very clear. It talks about everything that interfaces with the user, and that includes physical interface, like how do you flip that switch, how do you press the button. It's all part of usability. uh, the standard says you need to set up a usability engineering process. This is usually with a standard operating procedure or SOP. You need to consider risk when you talk about usability, and we covered a little bit of that for ISO 14971. And again, you document the evidence that you did what you said, and that's with the usability engineering file. This is usually not a separate file. This is part of your design history file. And actually, you can leverage your existing documentation for this. You just need to write what is where in your use. Typically, you do it in the usability report. The standard has a lot of sections. Most of the details that are of our interest are in section 5, and we are going to go through each of these sections. So we start with 5.1, which is specification, and all these details are usually done in a user requirement document. The name of that document could be different. Some people call it functional requirement, some call it user requirement, some call it product specifications, requirements, sorry. It's your word, whatever you prefer. The important part here is what do you write in it. And the standard asks you to write the indication of use, the medical indication of use. Who are your intended patient population? And we'll take a look at a quick example on what that means. What part of body or tissue does your device interact with? Who are the intended users of your device? And what is the environment in which they use this new device? And what is the operating principle of this device? So as an example, we are going to take another theme from Star Trek, the tricorder. We covered this in our risk analysis as well. And just a reminder, this was a chargeable handheld device, and we are going to use this device to detect broken bones. We're not going to fix anything, it's just going to detect them. And just for the sake of bringing in hazards from laser, we said this is going to scan the skin using laser for localizing exactly how far the surface is from the device. And then it's going to emit infrared light and use the right light reflected back to detect fracture. This is completely hypothetical, but if you make it real as a real device, please remember me. Now, so what will we write in the user specification of this device? So the intended indication is a detection of fractures. The population could be adult or pediatric, and the reason it is important to write this down because an auditor is going to ask you, so did you actually try this on all these patient population? So the part of body it interacts with is skin and bones, and the people who use it are the first responders. So they could be either your emergency medical personnel, they could be doctors, they could be nurses. What that means is they're usually trained. It's not a random person off the street who is expected to use this device. Now, where will they use it? We expect this device to be used both outdoors and indoors. And the Star Trek crew travels to planets, all over the universe, and the temperature could range anywhere from -20 Celsius, frozen world, all the way to 50 Celsius in the middle of a desert. They could be using it in Mumbai, which is nearly 100% humidity in monsoon, or they could be using it in Rajasthan, which is going to be bone dry. The operating principle is to measure the reflected infrared light from bone muscle interface, and we are going to use that to detect continuity or discontinuity of the bone. Now, all this means is when you write, you can immediately see how this is going to reflect in your design requirements. For example, when you talk about temperature range, you are going to select the electronic component that can withstand this range. Same is true about humidity, and we are going to dig a little deeper on how this drives your requirements. The next section talks about what to cover in risk management, etc. We obviously the questionnaire that we talked about in the last talk comes important because it does ask about a lot of questions such as what are the foreseeable hazards and use errors. We also need to document the sequence of events from these hazards that lead to harm in risk analysis. And you can see how we can take credit for the stuff that we are doing anyway for risk analysis. And all the stuff that you do needs to be tested during summative evaluation. And we are going to cover what exactly that means later in the talk. And you write all this down in your usability plan, which could be part of your product development plan. It doesn't have to be a separate document. Now we talk about user interface specifications. They could be embedded in your user requirement document. And this is where you are going to think about the foreseeable use errors. You are going to talk about the use scenarios on and how the hazards come out of the user the scenarios. You talk about testable requirements related to user interface, and again, both software and hardware interface. And then you talk about, you should cover the accompanying documentation. And this could be in the form of user guide, it could be installation guide, operating manual, whatever it is. It needs to be written in a way that makes sense. Don't do it just for the sake of doing it. And actually your end users are required to look at it and say that, yes, this kind of makes sense and it's clear and intuitive. If there is any training that you need for your users, you need to lay that down in your user specification, and you need to have usually you need a training plan to say that here is how you are going to train your end users. So let's take a look at some of the specifications. The foreseeable user errors is when you bring this device, maybe they hold too close to the skin or too far from the skin that it doesn't work. And, you can see how, we probably need some kind of light to tell them you are in the sweet spot. If there are hazard related use scenarios, we talked about this one in our risk analysis talk, that what if the alert for a battery charge looks exactly the same as a broken bone? They need to look very, very different. Then there are testable requirements related to user interface, and they could be related to size and weight, and that should be comfortable for one person to carry in one hand, because they may be carrying something else like a stretcher or some other equipment in their other hand. It needs to be water resistant, because again, you are going to operate this in Mumbai. It needs to be easy to disinfect. Yes, I know it's going to not touch the skin. It's supposed to, hover a little above the skin. But what if the patient sneezes or you fall down, and now there is a blood on this little the mobile part of this device, and that gets contaminated. You need ability to disinfect it easily. If there is any calibration, you need to record it and show it to the end user. Is the device calibrated? And maybe there is an alert sound. And actually, the ISO 14971 questionnaire does ask about alerts. What are the alerts in your system? Is the volume level going to be sufficient if you are at a train station? Can you even hear it? So all these are usually result into user requirements. What is the accompanying documentation? Is it going to be a printed guide, or are there going to be voice instructions? So this is typically seen for things like a defibrillator, AEDs, automatic external defibrillators, where the device itself will say the instructions, in which case you obviously need language settings. If there are any required training, maybe there is a video or a manual or training manual, you need to write all that down in your user specification. Then the interface evaluation plan, and this is what you need to write in your usability plan. So the two kinds of evaluations that happen, one is called formative, and this is iterative. So this needs to happen while you are designing and developing. So do not develop your product and then take to your sample user and ask them, hey, will this do what you want, what you expect? No, do it at the start of the project, do it in the middle of your project, and do it before you finish the project. And when you finish the project, the second kind of evaluation you do is called summative, and we typically call it design validation. Both these evaluations need to involve your representative users. They don't have to be exactly the end users, but whoever the users are, the profile needs to be documented. And when we talked about the user requirements on your intended user profile, this is where it needs to be written down. Also, the test environment and other conditions. Are you going to test it indoors or outdoors? What is the space available for testing? Any accompanying documentation. You need to talk. If there is a user manual, if there is a installation manual, you need to cover it with your intended users. Also, go through the training syllabus if you have one, and how to cover this into the design validation. So coming to formative, as we said, this is iterative, happens during design and development, and Again, the important part is documentation. You need to document what were the interactions, who did you talk to, how do you know they are representative users. Maybe it's a surgeon. If it's a surgeon, is their resume, do you, if need, that person needs to be, for example, a board certified radiologist, you probably want to obtain the certification from the board. And again, if an auditor asks you, how do you know this person is a radiologist, you say, well, here is the certificate. When you start, you obviously won't have something for show and tell, not a physical device, not an implemented user interface, and you can totally do it with mockups. So to give some funny examples, the first, when we worked on the robot, the first mockup we did was actually a completely wooden model. We literally took plywood to make up what the robot will look like, and we showed this is how tall it's going to be, this is how large it's going to be. Do you think it's going to fit in your operating room? When we talked about software markup, and I remember the very first version, it was me and my boss. We literally did it on PowerPoint. That's it. We said, here is the screen. Here is how you click on the next button and it will take you here. Does the workflow on the user interface, does that make sense? This was before we wrote even a single line of software. And this is very quick. You can get the user feedback very, very quickly on that makes sense, what doesn't make sense, what could be too confusing. And the surgeon says, no, I'm never going to do that in the operating room. I'm going to require, or it could be somebody else. Oh, that's the job that's done by my nurse, which means that needs to be available to the nurse even before the surgeon logs in. And then you need to archive. If you had any presentations to the end user, if you took any discussion notes, this could be in the form of the written notes, it could be what you typed, it could be pictures, it could be even videos. Archive them. Please, please, please archive them, maintain the records, and in case of an audit or even for submission to the FDA, you can say, here are all the records. Usually they may not even ask you to see the records. All they want to see is evidence that you actually have it. The second part is the summative evaluation, and this happens at the end of design and development. So typically we call it design validation, and this is design verification is making sure that what you created, does that meet the specification, does that meet the requirement. Validation is, did you create the right thing? And if you have done the formative evaluation, the iterative process, you will not be surprised at the end. Believe me, you will be, because there will be some users who say, oh yeah, but now I can think of this different use case and there is a problem. It is done by the representative users, and we typically analyze the results of design validation for any new use errors, any hazards, or any new use scenarios. If we find them, we need to write them down. Sometimes you have to go back to design and development phase. This has happened in our experience. It is unfortunate, you are all ready to go, but if that's the product that's going to be unsafe or not going to meet its use, what's the point? You need to go back, maybe it was another iteration of your design, go again through design verification and come back to design validation. And in all this process, you need to reapply the usability engineering process. The section also talks about a UI/UP, or user interface of unknown provenance. Now, frankly, I have never seen this being used, because almost all the devices that I worked with, we always develop the user interface ourselves, or at least the mock-up of it. Even if the physical design might be implemented by a contract manufacturer, we still developed it. And this particular section talks about if somebody else has developed a user interface and the organization or the group of people who did it, they don't have any record of usability engineering. Now you need to basically cover the usability engineering process, because ultimately you are the manufacturer, which means you need to establish the use specifications. Now this is slightly different, because if the product or the user interface is already in production, it's already in the field, people are using it already, there will be post-production information, and you need to review that. Now, this could be in the form of, the one example I can think of is, if you are going to use, let's say, a thermometer that is used by somebody else as part of your device. Now the thermometer already exists, but suppose they don't have any record of usability engineering, but there are a lot of reports from the user that it just stops working. You need to review all that in your production, and then you need to cover the use error, hazard, use scenarios, and all that stuff in your risk analysis. So again, as I said, it's rare to see this happen, but there could be situations where this does happen. So when you're all done, this is what you need to document in your design history file, your user requirements, a plan for your design validation, and usually the usability plan can point to the design validation plan. All the records of what, remember the term formative evaluation. This is the usability meetings and discussion, the risk analysis which you need to do for ISO 14971 anyway, the records of validation testing, who did it, their signatures, dates, all the good stuff. And at the end, a usability report, a record of what kind of formative evaluation you did, what kind of summative evaluation you did, where are your hazards located, where are your use specifications located, and what's your ultimate conclusion. And that is pretty much it. This is a short talk because this was really part 2 of my last talk. So on the Star Trek theme, any questions, and may your product live long and prosper. So that is it for my presentation. Pranita, if you want to switch over to questions, we can do that.
Sure. Thanks, Sanjay. So I request participant, if they have any question, please put it in the chat box, or we can take it up now. So you can unmute yourself now, and you can raise your hand so that we can unmute you.
Now, just a quick note, if since we ran out of time last time, if you have some leftover questions from risk analysis, that is fine too. I can take those.
Okay, I think there is one person. I think Mr. Chatterjee. So we'll just allow him to unmute. So Mr. Chatterjee, we have you can unmute yourself and ask question. Mr. Chatterjee, Aninda. I guess we'll move to the next then.
Sure.
We have Nilesh Kumar Pandit. So yeah, you can. Yeah, he's on. Yeah, please go ahead.
Hi.
Hello.
Yeah, hi. Good evening. My question is very different. As far as Indian scenario is concerned, there is no such rules and regulations or any system is followed so far, and they have something 68, no, 38 or 39 list of equipment that is categorized under the medical device as a category. So in this case, what I learned in previous sessions or from some of my colleagues, that as of now, the CE mark and few certifications are important, like IEC, ISO 13485, 62304, and 60601-1-2. So these are the basic requirement of CE. So whatever I have learned today, so is also a requirement of CE.
No, none of these actually. Even if you look at CE mark, I don't think even the compliance with standards like 14971 or 13485 or even 62304, the software development standard, they don't require it. But almost everyone who submits for a CE mark does it anyway. And that's, again, if you go back to the very first talk, I actually did cover it, that usually the regulatory bodies don't say that you have to have certification to these standards.
Agree.
But they usually have, they publish either guidances or codes. Like, for example, the US has the FDA publishes the 21 CFR codes. And the codes are not very different from the standards. And instead of trying to comply with codes from 15 different countries, it's easier to just go to a standard and say, we actually comply with everything that this standard says. And if you have a record of that, the discussion with the regulatory bodies will be much easier compared to you trying to establish compliance with their specific codes or regulations. So it's, again, do you have to have certification of compliance? Absolutely not. But if you follow these guidelines, it gives a message, sends a message to the regulatory agency. So two things. One is for your own regulatory agency, that you are actually aware and following the good guidelines that their country has put together. The second part is to your customers, that there is a certain level of credibility that if you have certification, they kind of feel that you know what you're doing. And thirdly, especially if you are a startup looking to sell your company, your potential buyers are going to feel a little assured that a third party looked at your standards, and even if they did not, if they are themselves a medical device manufacturer, they probably have their own quality management system and they have gone through this before. And if you tell them that, oh yeah, you basically comply with 62366, and in the in the business development discussion, you can present, here is my usability file, if that discussion will go much smoother.
Yeah, can you hear me now? This is Dr. Anindya Chatterjee.
Hello, Dr. Chatterjee.
Yeah, I have picked up on the question answer also. Can you show us a failure mode effect analysis or during the product stage development of any product?
Okay.
How you have done an FMEA?
So Dr. Chatterjee, we'll take your question. Thank you for joining us. So Nilesh, if you have any other question, we'll take it
I
up.
have one more question.
Okay, please go ahead.
Sir, my project, we are offering the complete solution from the diagnosis and management board put together, and it contains electronic as well as a mobile software, both.
Okay.
So in this case, my mobile software also need to follow this, I mean, this is standard, or what? What do you suggest?
Yes, I would say so. Again, it depends on what you classify as a medical device. Usually, does your mobile software interface with your electronics?
Which electronics?
No, I thought your product has two parts, right? There's a mobile software and then there is electronics.
Yes.
And if they interface with each other, I would say you need to consider them as a system. And both the parts, the mobile software as well as your electronics, are part of your medical device system. And I would say the standard does apply.
Yeah,
and there are actually different regulations published for software in medical device, and in US FDA they actually have a term for it, SAMD, software as a medical device.
SAMD.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, what is happening right now? The interface between the device and a mobile is with only Bluetooth and just to share the data. That means I mean to say that whatever the reading we take from the device, and we share this data with the help of Bluetooth. This is the only interface, and then they both are separate. That means the mobile will be used by patient and the device is at hospital.
Again, it depends on how you what you submit to your government agency. But if you are going to submit your mobile software as part of the medical device, the standards apply. I would say even if they don't apply, there are so many concerns about private data getting leaked or security of the software. To me, it makes total sense to do these activities, even for software development.
But in case of software security, there are some HIPAA and certain compliances applicable.
Correct. Yep, exactly.
Okay. So you mean to say that along with the HIPAA and certain, or let's say the other compliance for the software data security, we need to go for this kind of standard also.
At least consider it. I mean, even if you are developing software, you want to make sure that who are the end users of your software. Like, for example, if they are going to use your software on a smartphone, right? What kind of smartphone are they going to use to? Are you going to restrict it to tablets, or is it going to be a small factor phone? Are your buttons large enough for them to use? What about the language interface? So there are a lot of considerations purely from usability from our talk today that apply even from risk analysis. What if your software stops working? Are the users going to have a false sense that they are safe when in fact they are not? So please consider all this when you talk about software. Pranita, should we move on to the next one?
Sure.
Thanks a lot, sir.
Yeah. Thanks, Nilesh, for joining.
Sure. Dr. Chatterjee, if I remember right, your question was about FMEA, the failure mode effectivity analysis.
Yes, I mean, it is also in the chat box. Dr. Chatterjee, you can unmute yourself if there is anything else as well. Oh, okay. I think Sanjay, please go ahead.
Yeah. So in my talk, Dr. Chatterjee, I did not cover FMEA. I covered only the risk analysis part of it, because the standard usually talks about risk analysis. They don't talk about FMEA. Having said that, we almost do FMEA. And the way I look at FMEA is basically exactly the other direction of risk analysis. So risk analysis looks at your whole system. What different things can go wrong? And if they go wrong, what is the harm that they can cause? What is the probability of that harm? And then a net risk that comes out of it. And then what do you do to control the risk? the FMEA, and we typically there are multiple types of FMEA. So for product development, we usually do the design FMEA. That now that you have designed the product, are there ways that your design might fail that results into a hazard? Like for example, you decide to put let's say lithium cell batteries in your electronics, and now there is a danger of fire from those batteries. And if you did not consider it in your risk analysis, we usually write it in the design FMEA. Now there is usually one more column in addition to your hazard, harm and occurrence. Usually in FMEA, we talk about detectability. If something goes wrong, what is the likelihood that a user can see it? Like for example, a fire is easily detectable. Anybody can see it. But if it's a short circuit, it's nearly impossible to see it or detect it, and you are going to see only the end result of that of that situation. And
Yeah,
then for
I just interrupt you here. Basically, I wanted you to very much be specific on the design FMEA, that taking into consideration all the factors that we call as HIRA, hazard is identification, risk analysis, and then coming up with the design. But still, 1% chance remains that there can be an event of failure. In that
absolutely.
case, how you go about with the FMEA?
Correct. So usually, so when you talk about a failure, the failure could happen during manufacturing or production of the part, during service, or with the end user. And you're usually going to manage it with your complaint management SOP. And when the report comes back that such and such failure happened, you usually want to go back and look, is that situation, the specific kind of failure, is that covered either in your risk analysis or FMEA? And as you said, if there is that 1% or this outlier that we never thought about it during design, but it did happen, then again the question you ask is, are there existing controls? And number one, are they there? Number two, did they work? And did they work effectively to eliminate harm from the patient? If they did, well, you are okay. You need to write down all these things. If they did not, and if you have to change the design of the product, or if you need to alert the user that there is such and such unsafe situation that can happen, that would be a safety recall on the product.
So what is the percentage of cases, let's say out of 10 products, you had to go for an FMEA during the trial stage?
So for all our products, we did FMEA.
Okay, so everything went well on the first go itself in all the products?
No. Okay. So FMEA, we created the FMEA during the design phase. And before we submitted the product for evaluation to the regulatory agencies. Now, after the product was in the field, yes, we did get complaints. And in my tenure, I did have the unfortunate occasion of doing 2 safety recalls. So I have done it.
Okay.
Yeah, it is very painful. Trust me.
Okay, thank you. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chatterjee, for joining us. We have another attendee who want to ask question. Mr. Dattaguru. Yeah.
Can you hear?
Sure.
Yeah, I have a wearable device actually, which is meant to work as a touch-based hearing aid. So it's a wearable device, non-invasive. So what would be the first line of regulations that I need to clear in order?
So for anything that you want to qualify as a medical device, your first to do is ISO 13485, the quality management system, because that's the system that tells you that you actually need to follow a disciplined product development workflow. Typically, you need to write down what is it that you're doing, requirements, design plans, how we are going to make it, and we covered all that in the first talk. Almost all medical devices will need to follow the 2 standards that we talked in the last and this talk, the 14971 risk management and 62366 usability. Again, don't let the process overwhelm you, but these are the basic things that you should be thinking about your device anyway. The third part, it again depends on your device. If there is software or firmware that interfaces are included in your device, you need to look at IEC 62304. And if it's electronics, physical, electrical, mechanical parts, there is a 60601 family of standards. If you have other things like laser lights, So it's a wearable device, so you probably don't have any ionizing radiation, so you don't need to worry about those. So I would say first stop is 13485, next 14971 and 62366.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us. Any other questions from audience? If, as Sanjay mentioned, if there are any question on risk analysis as well, or maybe anything related to ISO, as in we can cover it, right, Sanjay? If there
Yeah,
are
absolutely. Yeah, we do still have a few minutes.
any. I can see Arshad in the audience. Arshad, would you like to ask something about your exoskeleton? If you would like to ask that question, please raise your hand. We can unmute you. So these are some of the grantees from our various program,
Okay.
which are supported under BIRAC. So they have also joined. Okay, Arshad, go on.
Yes, sir. Good morning, sir. I mean, good evening, sorry.
Good evening. Yes, it is very early in the morning for
Yeah,
me.
yeah, sorry. So our product is basically an upper limb exoskeleton.
Mhm.
It is used for complete automation of the complete upper limb. So mainly shoulder and elbow. So the end user, that's our the main I mean the clinicians and physiotherapists are the one who will be operating this, and the end user will be stroke patients, muscular neuromuscular patients, etc. This will be mainly attached to the body, upper limb. In our design there are two contacts to the upper limb. So while hearing your presentation, I have because we have three components acting all together. That is, we have mechanical, we have electronics, and we have a GUI. All the three should be gone to this ISO, this IEC 62366.
So when you create your medical device system,
Yeah.
there is a software part, there is a GUI part, there is a mechanical or electromechanical part, and if there is a charger that is detachable, I'm just
Yes. Yeah.
right. So in my view, all those are subsystems of your system, and
Yeah.
what you create is the whole system. The three parts that talk to each other. In my mind, the processes apply to all of them, all the
Yes.
three components, and my mind, you should do it for all three components. But you don't need to do it separately for those three components. What you can say, for example, your risk management, risk analysis, or your usability requirements, they can be just part of one document, and you could have sections in that document that talk about the charger, the GUI, or the mechanical part.
Okay. So also, sir, this is the first because we don't have a product exoskeleton in India till now in the market. We have CPM machines. We have different kinds of CPM machines. But while when we are searching for a post-product features, like you said earlier, we can look for the post-product features in order to get some idea and all while making this risk management file. But we are not getting that type of one. So we are going like a advanced kind of a CPM machine like thing.
Okay. I'm trying to understand. So what is your question?
So actually, we have continuous passive machines, that is CPM machines, available in India. We don't have an exoskeleton as such. An upper limb exoskeleton mainly. So if you want to look for post-product features in order to make the risk management files and IEC files, we are not getting anything related to a product in India. But we can get something from US, Singapore, that we can get, and even in China.
Now, okay. So Arshad, let's take a step back. You are making an innovative product that has never been done before, let's say. Or at least you don't have access to
it was not in the market.
Well, I mean, and what could be better, right? If you are making something that's never been done before, what that also means is, what are, in our language, world, we call them predicate devices. And the predicate devices don't have to have exactly all the features that your devices has. Now, for example, when we did the robot, we did a robot that includes navigation using infrared cameras and a robotic arm. So at that time, there was no other device that did it. And so ours was the first. So what did we do? We said, well, there is a robot that does not have navigation, and that was our predicate device. And there is a navigation system that did not have a robot. So we used two of them together as predicate devices, and we say, well, we are going to create something that kind of combine these two. Now, in the USA, if the FDA, US FDA has already approved a device or a group of devices that you take credit as predicate devices, you can go for a process known as 510K, which is a much faster approval compared to a completely novel device in which you need to go through clinical trials or PMA. That's a multi-year process. So we always look for predicate devices. If somebody has done it before, it doesn't have to be exactly what you did, but even if it's parts of it, take credit for it. And then in fact, the risk, and I didn't touch upon it in the risk analysis standard, but one of the things the standard asks you to do is, for similar devices, are there any reports of malfunction? Are there any reports of failures in the field? And what failed? Because the government wants you to look at it, right? If, like, for example, let's take the example of your limb, and I'm just going to look the example of the charger, and what if the charger catches fire? You probably want to look at other devices that have chargers, and what is the likelihood that the charger catches fire? And if you say, well, it happens all the time, you need to take that into account. Or your mechanical limb breaking, you talked about the passive systems. What are the times when when it just broke, it couldn't bear the weight? And then you can generally, at least in the USA, the information is available publicly. It's in a database called MAUDE mod. It's published by the government and you can access it. Just do a quick web search. And that's what actually you need to record in your risk analysis, that here are the predicate devices and here is all the bad things that happen with those predicate devices. Does that help, Arshad?
Yes, sir. And one more doubt. We are actually moving in that lane only, but we have an extra kind of a software algorithm. That is, we are using a kind of an augmented reality with an AI algorithm for a trajectory predicting. That is predicting. So in that case, how we should move?
So again, I would actually start with software mockups. So if you have a interface, if you already written the software, you can just show the software to your intended users. And this is where the formative evaluation comes in. Who are your users? If there are, like, people at home, you probably want to have representative users. If there are doctors and nurses, you want to talk to them, show them that this is what you have. Ask them, does it meet, does this meet the intended use? Do you think this will be acceptable to the end user? This will be helpful to the end user. And that's the part of your meetings that will happen during your design and development phase.
Yeah, that is, yes, sir. We have actually done that, and they are actually they are very much needed for that algorithm. I'm asking about how we have to go in that. I mean, an AI with a augmented reality. So like that, like you said earlier, we have to partition it and get the predicate device like an augmented reality glass for health, like that we have to go.
Again, it depends. I can't speak about the specific components of your system, but this is where you need to put on your thinking cap and say, what can I take credit for? My recommendation is do the best to find a predicate device. It will make your submission go much easier, because you are telling the government that, hey, you already approved something like this before. Here is the name of the device, and look, my device is so similar.
Okay, fine. Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Sure.
Thanks, Arshad. We have one more. I think we have one more question in the chat box, and Ayush raised his hand, so we'll take that question. So Ayush, you can unmute yourself and ask your question.
Hello.
Yes, Ayush, we can hear you.
Yeah, sir, I wanted to ask one question. Like, we are making an orthopedic device, and there is an electronic part that is going to be implanted in the body. Now, to power it, we are going like there is an external device that wirelessly transmit power to it. So for that wireless power transmission, we are using inductive coils. So I want to know, like, how much power can be transmitted, or what are the limitations or constraints while designing it, and how will it go through the regulatory process?
Right. So two things there. The bigger problem, Ayush, is not your power transfer, it's your implantable implant. I mean, the implant that is going to be inside the body. The
Okay.
standards for something that is implantable are, the government usually holds them at a very high level, because once you implant it with a surgical procedure, you are done. You don't want to extract it later. So definitely start with those standards. I assume you have done it already, but any wireless power transfer to the device, my gut feel is you are going to look at the 60601 family of standards. I don't know exactly which one will apply,
Okay.
but those standards should apply. Now, if you are going to do inductive wireless energy, also think about heating,
Yes.
because usually the power transfer will cause heat, and now that heat is going to be inside the body. And now you want to measure how much is the temperature rise and have some safe limits. And there's a tremendous concern out there, especially with implantable devices. What if somebody hacks? So on the software side, pay very close attention to IEC 62304.
62304. Sir,
Yeah,
actually, there is
that's
one
the.
predicate device quite similar to us, and that has been passed with similar technology. So,
Yep.
like, I want to know if there are any standards for it.
I'm pretty sure there are standards for it. I just don't know which ones they are. I'll say, you can go to ISO website or IEC website. My gut feel is going to be more on the IEC website that
Okay.
talks about wireless power transfer. Also, this is where you want to do research. Also, look at the product catalog of the competition. What do they talk about? Because they actually might say, hey, we are compliant with this, this, and this. And they might actually list the standards that they are compliant with. So that's your easy answer.
Okay, sir. And also, I wanted to ask about, like, if there is exposure to radiation, then is there any standards for
Yes,
that?
absolutely. Exposure to radiation, if it's X-rays, there is a 60601 sub standard for X-rays. For
Okay.
MRI, there is another standard. The other thing to consider for an implantable or something that is implantable is how will it interact with with X-ray and MRI? If there is going to be ferrous metal in it, and if you once you implant it inside the patient and the patient goes in an MRI scanner,
Yes.
can it cause harm? So
Okay, so what is the
anything that is
standard for MRI? Like,
I don't remember off the top of my head, but 60601 is usually a good place to start for anything that is electromechanical.
okay. All right. Is there any website that you can suggest so I can find more details about it there?
I'll say IEC is probably the best place to start. IEC.ch.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, sir. Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks, Ayush, for joining us. There is one question in the chat box. There are a few questions in the chat box.
Okay.
So one question from anonymous attendee is that as per CDSCO, alcohol swabs, disposal masks, gloves, safety kits, etc., comes under medical devices. So we need to have product usability for such devices as well.
I will say yes, because if you are going to make, like, let's say gloves, right? You probably at least want to write down, well, what sizes do you care about? Is it going to be probably not pediatric? But at the same time, adults, I mean, if you look at, like, let's say you plan to sell it in Japan, where people are usually on the smaller side, as opposed to, let's say, US or Canada, where people tend, where some people tend to have very large hands. Do you have all the different covers, the coverage? Again, in what situation are they going to do it? Is it going to be inside the hospital? What about latex allergies or allergies to some other substance? So I would say you need to consider it. How far you go, again, that's where use your good judgment. That don't let the standard kill you.
Yeah. So there are few attendees asking for video recording. So this recording will be available on the SINE YouTube channel, and we'll send a link to all attendees here via email. Or you can also check our SINE YouTube channel as well. There's one attendee, Sanjay, again anonymous, is asking the difference between 60601 /2 and 61610 EMC testing.
I am not the no, I don't know the exact answer to this, but in my experience, the 60601 family of standard that includes EMC testing, And we are always gone with the 60601. The other standard you're talking about, I'm not sure I'm familiar with that one.
Okay.
So I'm sorry, I don't know the answer to your question.
Okay, there is one question from Yashwini. How can a device be classified as MR safe and MR safe conditional, MR unsafe for endoscopes?
So again, you need to look at the standard. Again, I don't know exactly the name and number of the standard for MRI safety, but it usually goes to the material inside the MRI because MRI is obviously, if you know, MRI is very high magnetic field, typically 15,000 times the magnetic field of Earth and even higher. And if anything that is inside the body, and that includes any ferrous like iron or related material, MRI scanners can exert enough force to rip it out of the body, and it can happen. So there are standards for MRI safety. Unfortunately, I don't have the name and number of the standard off the top of my head. But if you do a quick search on what standards apply for MR compatibility for an implant, I'm sure you are going to find the answer. The other thing to consider is if there is metal in your implant, how much is the metal and how much heat can it cause if you are doing an MRI scan. Some of these you may actually have to do the experiments. Then literally put your implant inside an MRI scanner, take a scan, measure the temperature.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Sanjay. And here is the link for the SINE YouTube channel. It's in the chat box. The video will be available on this link. I mean, right after this, we end this session. So I think, we have one more question. If we can take that, Sanjay, I think we still have 4 minutes.
Yep.
Do we need to add all the history of designs that gone wrong already in the usability engineering file?
Well, yes, because how did you know that your design went wrong, right? And usually you know it because either it failed a test or when your end users looked at it, they said, no, this is not going to work. And that should be in the record of your formative evaluation. When you, during the design and development, when you showed something to the user, you need to record what you showed. Now, it could be in the form of just a photograph or a UI mockup. It doesn't have to be a finished product. I'm reading too much into your question. If you are saying that do we need to have the design that did not work, do we need to release it as a part or as a controlled part in our ERP system? No, that's not required. But do you need to show it? Actually, an auditor would love to see it, because everybody wants to tell how successful their product is. Nobody wants to talk about the failures and what they learned from failure. But an auditor, if they say that, oh, this was the design in, like, let's say your discussion number 3, and you figured out it's not going to work, and you came up with a completely different design by your meeting number 4, they would love to see that. And we have actually done it. When we created the robot or the imaging system, everything didn't go right the first time. We iterated through design. We significantly changed the design in order to meet the end user needs. And that's absolutely that happens. And we do have a record of our failures, the failed design. Again, don't let the standard roll when you just a photograph, a video, a mock-up. That's good enough.
Okay, thanks, Sanjay. We have one hand raised. I think we can still take that. So Ajay, please go ahead.
Good evening. So thanks for a very nice informative discussion. My question is from the that costing part. While we develop any device, so at lab scale the costing becomes something, and when we go for industrial scale manufacturing, then the costing may become entirely different. Now, to make the product affordable for the customer end, we can think from the design aspect, from the in the planning stage itself, that whether my product, when it goes to the industry manufacturing production stage, whether this will be affordable or not. Are there any such sort of frameworks available?
Not from the medical device compliance, because frankly, from the medical device compliance, they don't want to put any any requirement on the affordability of a product, because that usually is a very messy topic. They talk about safety of your device, and definitely the thing will, you don't want to compromise safety because your product is not going to be affordable otherwise. You know, there are other ways you can look at cutting cost. I would say that's more of a business decision. Do not, I would say that don't let the cost reduce safety of your device. At the same time, don't go so out of the way on safety that your product is actually unsellable. So no, the standards do not prescribe that, what the costing should be.
And
But
there are
if
no
you are going
frameworks
to,
also.
no. I mean, again, this is more of the business development side.
No, yeah, I mean, no management frameworks available. There is no design frameworks available. Right?
Not from design controls perspective. I'm sure as a good business practice, there will be frameworks available more from the management side of things on how do you take the cost into account, how do you create, roll that up into a bill of material, or if you are going to make a design change to make your product cheaper to manufacture, usually, and that does happen in our world too, that, when we initially create the product, it's usually a little more costly to produce. And once we figure out ways to reduce costs, sometimes we might say that instead of assembling it ourselves, we can give it to a contract manufacturer who can make it cheaper. But any of those design changes that you do to your product, they are under very much design control scenario, and these standards apply.
Okay.
I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, somewhat.
All right.
Thank you, Mr. Chakravarti, for joining us. Sanjay, it's 6:01 here. Yeah, so with this, I think we would like to thank all our participants and attendees for such a interesting interactive session. And thank you so much, Sanjay, for addressing all their questions, this topic and this ISO, series all together. So thank you so much, Sanjay.
You are quite welcome. Thank you to you for organizing, and all the attendees for excellent questions.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, and have a great weekend. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye now.